Section 12 of Villette by Charlotte Bronte. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 12. My time was now well and profitably filled up. What with teaching others and studying closely myself, I had hardly a spare moment. It was pleasant. I felt I was getting on, not lying the stagnant prey of mould and rust, but polishing my faculties and whetting them to a keen edge with constant use. Experience of a certain kind lay before me on no narrow scale. Villette is a cosmopolitan city, and in this school were girls of almost every European nation, and likewise of very varied rank in life. Equality is much practised in Labassecour. Though not republican in form, it is nearly so in substance, and at the desks of Madame Beck's establishment the young countess and the young bourgeois sat side by side. Nor could you always by outward indications decide which was noble and which plebeian, except that indeed the latter had often franker and more courteous manners, while the former bore away the bell for a delicately balanced combination of insolence and deceit. In the former there was often quick French blood mixed with the marsh phlegm. I regret to say that the effect of this vivacious fluid chiefly appeared in the oilier glibness with which flattery and fiction ran from the tongue, and in a manner lighter and livelier, but quite heartless and insincere. To do all parties justice, the honest aboriginal Labassecourienne had an hypocrisy of their own, too, but it was of a coarse order, such as could deceive few. Whenever a lie was necessary for their occasions, they brought it out with a careless ease and breadth, altogether untroubled by the rebuke of conscience. Not a soul in Madame Beck's house, from the scullion to the directress herself, but was above being ashamed of a lie. They thought nothing of it. To invent might not be precisely a virtue, but it was the most venial of faults. J'ai menti plusieurs fois formed an item of every girl's and woman's monthly confession. The priest heard unshocked, and absolved unreluctant. If they had missed going to Mass, or read a chapter of a novel, that was another thing. These were crimes whereof rebuke and penance were the unfailing weed. While yet but half conscious of this state of things, and unlearned in its results, I got on in my new sphere very well. After the first few difficult lessons, given amidst peril and on the edge of a moral volcano that rumbled under my feet and sent sparks and hot fumes into my eyes, the eruptive spirit seemed to subside. As far as I was concerned, my mind was a good deal bent on success. I could not bear the thought of being baffled by mere undisciplined disaffection and wanton indocility in this first attempt to get on in life. Many hours of the night I used to lie awake, thinking what plan I had best adopt to get a reliable hold on these mutineers, to bring the stiff-necked tribe under permanent influence. In the first place, I saw plainly that aid in no shape was to be expected from Madame. Her righteous plan was to maintain an unbroken popularity with the pupils at any and every cost of justice or comfort to the teachers. For a teacher to seek her alliance in any crisis of insubordination was equivalent to securing her own expulsion. In intercourse with her pupils, Madame only took to herself what was pleasant, amiable, and recommendatory, rigidly requiring of her lieutenants sufficiency for every annoying crisis, where to act with adequate promptitude was to be unpopular. Thus I must look only to myself. Imprimis, it was clear as the day that this swinish multitude were not to be driven by force. They were to be humoured, borne with very patiently. A courteous though sedate manner impressed them. A very rare flash of raillery did good. Severe or continuous mental application they could not, or would not bear. Heavy demand on the memory, the reason, the attention, they rejected point blank. Where an English girl of not more than average capacity and docility would quietly take a theme and bind herself to the task of comprehension and mastery, a Labassecourienne would laugh in your face and throw it back to you with the phrase, Dieu, que c'est difficile, je n'en veux pas, cela m'ennuie trop. A teacher who understood her business would take it back at once, without hesitation, contest, or expostulation, proceed with even exaggerated care to smooth every difficulty, to reduce it to the level of their understandings, return it to them thus modified, and lay on the lash of sarcasm with unsparing hand. They would feel the sting, perhaps wince a little under it, but they bore no malice against this sort of attack, provided the sneer was not sour, but hearty, and that it held well up to them, in a clear, light, and bold type, so that she who ran might read their incapacity, ignorance, and sloth. They would riot for 3 additional lines to a lesson, but I never knew them rebel against a wound given to their self-respect. The little they had of that quality was trained to be crushed, and it rather liked the pressure of a firm heel than otherwise. By degrees, as I acquired fluency and freedom in their language, and could make such application of its more nervous idioms as suited their case, the elder and more intelligent girls began rather to like me in their way. I noticed that whenever a pupil had been roused to feel in her soul the stirring of worthy emulation, or the quickening of honest shame, from that date she was won. If I could but once make their usually large ears burn under their thick glossy hair, all was comparatively well. By and by, bouquets began to be laid on my desk in the morning. By way of acknowledgment for this little foreign attention, I used sometimes to walk with a select few during recreation. In the course of conversation it befell once or twice that I made an unpremeditated attempt to rectify some of their singularly distorted notions of principle. Especially I expressed my ideas of the evil and baseness of a lie. In an unguarded moment I chanced to say that, of the 2 errors, I considered falsehood worse than an occasional lapse in church attendance. The poor girls were tutored to report in Catholic ears whatever the Protestant teacher said. An edifying consequence ensued. Something, an unseen, an indefinite, and nameless, something stole between myself and these my best pupils. The bouquets continued to be offered, but conversation thenceforth became impracticable. As I paced the alleys or sat in the berceau, a girl never came to my right hand, but a teacher, as if by magic, appeared at my left. Also, wonderful to relate, Madame's shoes of silence brought her continually to my back, as quick, as noiseless, and unexpected as some wandering zephyr. The opinion of my Catholic acquaintance concerning my spiritual prospects was somewhat naively expressed to me on one occasion. A pensionnaire, to whom I had rendered some little service, exclaimed one day as she sat beside me, "Mademoiselle, what a pity you are a Protestant!" "Why, Isabelle?" "Parce quand vous serez morte, vous brûlerez tout de suite dans l'enfer." "Croyez-vous?" "Certainement que j'y crois. Tout le monde le sait, et Tailleur de Prêtre me l'a dit." Isabelle was an odd, blunt little creature. She added, sotto voce, "Pour assurer votre salut là-haut, on ferait bien de vous brûler tout vif ici-bas." I laughed, as indeed it was impossible to do otherwise. Has the reader forgotten Miss Ginevra Fanshawe? If so, I must be allowed to reintroduce that young lady as a thriving pupil of Madame Beck's, for such she was. On her arrival in the Rue Fossette, 2 or 3 days after my sudden settlement there, she encountered me with very little surprise. She must have had good blood in her veins, for never was any duchess more perfectly, radically, unaffectedly nonchalant than she. A weak, transient amaze was all she knew of the sensation of wonder. Most of her other faculties seemed to be in the same flimsy condition. Her liking and disliking, her love and hate, were mere cobweb and gossamer. But she had one thing about her that seemed strong and durable enough, and that was her selfishness. She was not proud, and, bonne d'enfant as I was, she would forthwith have made of me a sort of friend and confidant. She teased me with 1,000 vapid complaints about school quarrels and household economy. The cookery was not to her taste. The people about her, teachers and pupils, she held to be despicable because they were foreigners. I bore with her abuse of the Friday's salt fish and hard eggs, with her invective against the soup, the bread, the coffee, with some patience for a time. But at last, wearied by iteration, I turned crusty and put her to rights, a thing I ought to have done in the very beginning, for a salutary setting down always agreed with her. Much longer had I to endure her demands on me in the way of work. Her wardrobe, so far as concerned articles of external wear, was well and elegantly supplied, but there were other habiliments not so carefully provided. What she had needed frequent repair. She hated needle drudgery herself, and she would bring her hose, etc., to me in heaps, to be mended. A compliance of some weeks, threatening to result in the establishment of an intolerable bore, I at last distinctly told her she must make up her mind to mend her own garments. She cried on receiving this information, and accused me of having ceased to be her friend, but I held by my decision, and let the hysterics pass as they could. Notwithstanding these foibles, and various others needless to mention, but by no means of a refined or elevating character, how pretty she was, how charming she looked, when she came down on a sunny Sunday morning, well dressed and well humoured, robed in pale lilac silk, and with her fair long curls reposing on her white shoulders. Sunday was a holiday which she always passed with friends resident in town, and amongst these friends she speedily gave me to understand was one who would fain become something more. By glimpses and hints it was shown me, and by the general buoyancy of her look and manner it was ere long proved, that ardent admiration, perhaps genuine love, was at her command. She called her suitor Isidore. This, however, she intimated was not his real name, but one by which it pleased her to baptize him, his own, she hinted, not being very pretty. Once, when she had been bragging about the vehemence of Isidore's attachment, I asked if she loved him in return. "Comme cela," said she. "He is handsome, and he loves me to distraction, so that I am well amused. Ça suffit." Finding that she carried the thing on longer than, from her very fickle tastes, I had anticipated, I one day took it upon me to make serious inquiries as to whether the gentleman was such as her parents, and especially her uncle, on whom it appeared she was dependent, would be likely to approve. She allowed that this was very doubtful, as she did not believe Isidore had much money. "Do you encourage him?" I asked. "Furieusement, sometimes," said she. "Without being certain that you will be permitted to marry him." "Oh, how dowdyish you are! I don't want to be married. I am too young." "But if he loves you as much as you say, and yet it comes to nothing in the end, he will be made miserable. Of course he will break his heart. I should be shocked and disappointed if he didn't. I wonder whether this Monsieur Isidore is a fool, said I. He is, about me, but he is wise in other things. Ah, qu'on dit, Mrs. Cholmondeley considers him extremely clever. She says he will push his way by his talents. All I know is, that he does little more than sigh in my presence, and that I can wind him round my little finger. Wishing to get a more definite idea of this love-stricken Monsieur Isidore, whose position seemed to me of the least secure, I requested her to favour me with a personal description, but she could not describe. She had neither words nor the power of putting them together so as to make graphic phrases. She even seemed not properly to have noticed him. Nothing of his looks, of the changes in his countenance, had touched her heart, or dwelt in her memory. That he was beau, mais plutôt bel homme que joli garçon, was all she could assert. My patience would often have failed, and my interest flagged in listening to her, but for one thing. All the hints she dropped, all the details she gave, went unconsciously to prove, to my thinking, that Monsieur Isidore's homage was offered with great delicacy and respect. I informed her very plainly that I believed him much too good for her, and intimated with equal plainness my impression that she was but a vain coquette. She laughed, shook her curls from her eyes, and danced away as if I had paid her a compliment. Miss Ginevra's school studies were little better than nominal. There were but 3 things she practised in earnest, viz., music, singing, and dancing, also embroidering the fine cambric handkerchiefs which she could not afford to buy ready-worked. Such mere trifles as lessons in history, geography, grammar, and arithmetic she left undone or got others to do for her. Very much of her time was spent in visiting. Madame, aware that her stay at school was now limited to a certain period, which would not be extended whether she made progress or not, allowed her great license in this particular. Mrs. Cholmondeley, her chaperone, a gay, fashionable lady, invited her whenever she had company at her own house, and sometimes took her to evening parties at the houses of her acquaintance. Ginevra perfectly approved this mode of procedure. It had but one inconvenience. She was obliged to be well dressed, and she had not money to buy variety of dresses. All her thoughts turned on this difficulty. Her whole soul was occupied with expedients for effecting its solution. It was wonderful to witness the activity of her otherwise indolent mind on this point, and to see the much daring intrepidity to which she was spurred by a sense of necessity and the wish to shine. End of section 12. Recording by Leanne Fortune.